Sam, I did get your message today, and I did mention that.
Oh, thank you.
And, but you were out tearing down posters.
Only by request, and I don't drive the property.
Good move. You talked to a lawyer who did that?
Private property.
Yeah. Oh, here's it.
I don't think you will.
So my guess is 8 hours.
Is that right?
Yeah, they're paying us.
Well,
It's scary though. It's disgusting.
as I was leaving the station, police everywhere was completely surrounded. They responded.
I was on 50, a little longer, so.
You will echo
Members of the public, be advised that the media and other individuals may audibly or visually or both be recording this meeting. Welcome to our City Housing Hamilton meeting on this June 29th. Madam Clerk, any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there are 2 changes to the agenda. Item 5.1 should read, City Housing Hamilton Corporation 2015 Audited Consolidated Financial Statements. And item 5.2 has been consolidated with 4.1 as it is duplication.
A motion to approve the agenda as amended, moved by Councilor Brendan Johnson, seconded by Councilor Doug Conley. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none. Any declarations of interest? Seeing none. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of our June 9th, 2015 meeting, moved by Councilor Skelly, seconded by Councilor Marula. All in favor? I now call, and any opposed? None. It carries. Now I call on Tom Hunter, the CEO of City Housing Hamilton, to make his presentation respecting the 2015 City Housing, 2016 I think this should be, City Housing Hamilton Annual Report. No, it's 2015. Are there any questions for Tom? Well, we'll find out after his presentation.
Thank you, through the chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and councillors. On behalf of the City Housing Hamilton Board of Directors, I am pleased to present the 2015 annual report and to provide further context around where we've had success, where we've had some challenges, and as well where we want to move to strengthen our future. Here's our mission statement: providing affordable housing. It's safe, well-maintained, cost-effective, and it meets the diverse needs of our residents of our communities. In preparing for the presentation, I decided to frame it around our current strategic plan. And this overhead speaks to our first priority area, much at least to reflect the strategic plan of value and sustainable services. You see our objectives there. What we've done at City Housing Hamilton is taken this drilled down just a wee bit further, and in the black line you'll see vacancy and arrears. And this has been the focus in this particular priority area over 2015, and I'll speak to that later in the presentation. For prosperous communities as a strategic priority, here we framed it around revitalization. What do we need to do around our infrastructure development? The third priority area, leadership and governance, we focus here on relationships. So as I move through the presentation, the majority of the presentation today, it will be around arrears, vacancies, relationships, and revitalization. First of all, in the area of arrears, this had historically for City Housing Hamilton, for housing providers, it's a challenge. And we have looked at this from a very focused perspective. And when we looked at this in 2015, this is the situation, this is the challenge that we were looking at. Our arrears were at 17%, so that represented roughly $500,000 for us. And the industry standard was around 5%, so clearly an area for improvement. When we broke down that 17% a bit further, there's 11% which was receivable, what was referred to as real rent arrears, but there was also a 6% which was a result of default of the residents under annual subsidy renewal paperwork. So as we start to look at this indicator more, we could see that we had to be a bit more specific in terms of the process and solution. And working with the staff and the leads on this project, we did look at where we wanted to do is to decrease our arrears down to 10% by May 2016, and I'll keep you posted on that one. And when we started to look at the project, this is what we were seeing over the previous years. That spike in 2013 related to, that was the year that there was implementing Northgate, a huge corporate initiative, and some things such as arrears weren't as a focus as probably they should. 2015, we're at 17%. So how did we approach this problem, this project? Councillor Collins initiated this by speaking to Chris, the city manager, about this particular process at City Housing Hamilton. We were able to solicit the support of Anil Gupta and Lisa Zinkowicz, Dennis Guy, who took us through the Lean Six Sigma process, which I know Council is very familiar with, and with focusing on how we get our team members, our frontline staff involved, and ultimately what are the changes and processes that we wanted to look at. And I will get this yet. Oh. There we go. And as we move through the process, for me, the success of this rested in really two key areas: how we were able to engage the staff, the people, and the process. And what has been very good for me to share with our board, with the staff, is as of the end of May, we're down to 12.94%. So it wasn't the 10% that we had originally predicted by the end of May. The project did start later, but we are certainly tracking in the right direction and moving towards that 10%. The other area that I wanted to talk about today was vacancy, and this is I think a very huge area for us. I put up my own quote, and this is something that I say to the residents a lot. I feel that the single most important thing that we do is to optimize the number of units are available that are for people to rent. And, from my work over years, in health and now in housing, when we talk about those determinants of health, housing is key. And when we look at the work that we have to do, making those units available, that's what we need to do in terms of the housing question for everybody to address it effectively. So what are we seeing, and what did we see over 2015 in the area of vacancy? So this slide looks at all of our units, and we break it down when we present this indicator to the board along the headings on the left. And you'll see that since June of last year, there has been good progress. We've gone from 5.2% to 4.5%. Now, that doesn't sound like a large mark, but when you're looking at that, what would be close to 1% for us represents 70 units. So we've been able to make, just under 70 more units available for people to live in, and once again help to reduce that access to housing. Also, an area of extensive focus, discussion, are units requiring repairs. And here again, progress was made over 2015 and into 16. When we look at this information now, from 92 down to 75. What I also want to point out on this chart is with the singles and semis, that is 33. Yes, that number is climbing, and I will speak to this larger later in the presentation, but it is the intention at City Housing Hamilton to sell some of our singles and semis, and therefore that number will increase as singles and semis vacate and are potentially for sale. We also, market units is another area. You can see a downward trend in terms of the vacancy there, so that's good. And once again, it is important for us to look at market units, because this certainly is a benefit to our revenue side when we optimize the number of market units that are rented. So, in terms of the future outcomes, what do we want to see? Certainly, the second point talks about the decrease in market unit vacancies, a decrease in overall vacancies. We also, though, are now turning our attention with the work that we've done on Lean Six Sigma around arrears. We're now turning our attention to look at vacancy as it relates to rental turnovers. So how much time is it taking us to rent out that unit from when it's available to actually when we rent it out, and looking at decreasing that time, faster turnover, making those units available more quickly. Also, the optimizing the dollars available for maintenance. We need to continue to focus on this area. When that previous slide that showed roughly 75 units that need to be repaired to get back to the market, that's about a $750,000 to $1 million investment. I think almost a more compelling number is the additional dollars that we require on an annual basis for maintenance. That's $1.8 to $2 million. Certainly, that is, but we know that those are dollars that we require to turn over if all of our units were on market, to keep them turned over. Also, with vacancy, I wanted to just share with Council a bit about First Place. When City Housing Hamilton took over this property, it was a property in distress known as a PID, and we have turned our attention to really, making this First Place, as its name says, and that's happened in many ways. And one of our reasons for that focus as a team is that's an apartment building with over 500 units, and there's commercial space in that. We have partnerships with St. Joseph's working out of there in our assisted living and transitional living units. We have a lot of programs operating in there for our seniors. So we really, have focused on this building over 2015 to get it kind of, heading in the right direction. And that, as you can see, the investments around $200,000 for capital repairs, $70,000 came from area rating dollars for the repairs. We also $200,000 to help renovate the retirement units. These are the units that are in relationship with St. Joe's. And we've also developed a much more closer working relationship with our city real estate to get things moving on the real estate front. The other item, which I will talk about later in the presentation, is the work that we've done on internal pest control at First Place as well. And finally, around vacancy, this is very important to us, and wanted to share with Council. This has been, a reflection of your commitment to our vacancy issue over the past year, $2.5 million. In October, Councillor Scott DeVell approved very generously $800,000 to repair units in Ward 7, $1.5 million capital funds, and then in November, councillors from wards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8 allocated up to, it was a total of $225,000 to help with the units. And I'm really pleased that I can share with council today that the money that was allocated to these projects has either been spent or the project has been started. So it has been a focus of our team to get that work done. The next area around our priorities was relationships. So just want to highlight, some of these relationships and the importance for our residents, our staff, the communities, organizations that are involved, and the governments as we work together. How we negotiate these relationships, build these relationships is important to our success. This was a picnic that was held, or actually a wellness fair that was held at St. Andrews as part of their annual general meeting at that site, and it brought together, here I talked about residents, community, but there was also police services was there, the fire department, the McMaster was doing a bit of a survey at that point, so really a really good engagement event. This is another important relationship that we have, partnership that we have with the LIN, the Local Health Integration Network, and with Strive Fitness. We offer wellness programs in 12 of our buildings for seniors, and we are optimistic that this will certainly be able to grow in the future as governments are looking at more support programs in buildings, in apartments. Also, the Hamilton Community Foundation, through our requests, we've been successful. They, in turn, have been extremely generous. And you can see the 4 programs that we've received support in, up to $50,000. And then just recently, in 2016, to support our Team Dignity around integrated pest control, we received another $10,000 from the Hamilton Community Foundation. So another very important partnership. And then, for the deputy mayor today, I thought I'd put his picture up. Yeah. No, but hey, we framed this our fundamental residential engagement, and there are projects around West Harbour with our 2 buildings there, 500 McNabb and Jamesville, where we are required to do communication. But, nonetheless, it is something that we really take to heart and understand the imperative around keeping our residents informed around projects and housing. So we've had, I think, 3 different events at each one of those properties to keep them informed about what is going on with the West Harbour and the redevelopment of those 2 properties. And I wanted to highlight this particular relationship, partnership, because it speaks to the heart of what our residents with supportive staff can achieve. And we really needed to focus around the integrated pest management program. We've internalized that program. We have had success. And when we wanted to focus on one of our buildings initially to see what would be the criteria to receive successful outcomes, it became apparent that resident involvement, in that first place, it became Team Dignity, where actually it was residents supporting residents as a unit was being treated that really took hold. So a fellow resident would, whether it would be before, during or after the treatment, helps another resident. There's a lounge where they can go to, and it really has helped, as the overhead says, build that trust and awareness of this issue. And we are now moving this program into 2 of our other apartment buildings. I believe it's 226 Rebecca and 155 Park with Team Dignity, and we will slowly roll it out through the buildings, through the larger apartment buildings. So a very important partnership, relationship. All right, the 4th area is revitalization. There are days that this is absolutely ominous to me, and with 1,200 properties, and how we move this forward. When I came to City Housing, very excited, about to be in the role, to learn and be a part of this movement. And when we get to this revitalization area, it is, a huge kind of question mark. It needs to be a real focus in the future, a real, priority. And we're moving in that direction. But it is one of those areas where it will take, the many to ensure that we have housing, sustainable housing, affordable housing moving forward. I wanted to just highlight some things that were in the annual report around our portfolio, and then just talk a bit more specifically about our work plan and what we'll need to do. The excellence in design, because this was a good news story that with this partnership at 95 King Street, there was given an award in design, and this spoke to using a heritage property, and also in the award they talked about this type of development helps to lead to revitalization of the core of a city. We also opened our doors at 690 Stone Church Road West, and with this particular project, what I would say was a winning factor is the design to the city to the free barrier-free guidelines and accessibility. So out of the 50 units in this building for seniors, 10%, 5 of those units are accessible, and certainly when we look at redevelopment in the future, that needs to be a factor. So this next overhead highlights our work plan, the 7 key areas of work plan. I won't go through all of these today, but there are 4 of them that I do want to touch on because I think they're significant to make people aware of as part of our 2015 and work moving forward. And the first area is just a bit about the environmental scan and talking federal, provincial, municipal government. And, we all know that there is an unprecedented focus on affordable housing across our country and our governments. And what I've put on this overhead in terms of the federal government was the recent commitment that they've spoken to for 2016 and on into 2018. And, we're looking at $500,000, $200,000, over $500,000 in those 3 areas. And so when I looked at this, I thought, what does this mean? What does this mean for Hamilton? So if you take a number like the investment in affordable housing of $500,000, and Ontario would typically see 35% of that allocation, which would take it around 176. Hamilton could be roughly 5%. At the end of the day, that may be $9 to $10 million for Hamilton, and not the number that we necessarily need, but at the same time it is an investment, it's more, and it's moving in the right direction. At the provincial level, the long-term affordable housing strategy did come out in 2016, but certainly a lot of talk about it through 2015. And portable housing benefits, enable inclusionary zoning, access to refinancing, all of these are going to be worked through in legislation. I did just want to speak to a bit more to that first point about the $100 million towards housing allowances and support services. And when you read through this very kind of extensive document, I think what's promising is what we hear about these supports that are intended to be put in place, supportive services in our buildings for our residents. So, whether it might look like counseling, it might be assisting with meds, it might be assistance with activity of daily living. Whatever that is, that's important to help support our residents in their buildings. Also, from a financial perspective as well from the provincial government, there was the allocation of, the acronym is SHARP, but the Social Housing Department Retrofit Program. This was an announcement made recently. Hamilton's allocation was $7.17 million. So we are optimistic at City Housing Hamilton that we'll see a large component of that, and certainly help with our energy retrofits to some of our larger apartment buildings. Also, most recently announced is the Climate Change Action Strategy. So this is once again large, and it's potentially $500 million to retrofit social housing apartments with energy efficiency, renewable energy technologies. Some of the tables that I've sat at, I've heard that that may extend, some of that may actually extend to aspects of maintenance repairs, which could work, which could work for us as well. And then at the municipal government level with our council, so I spoke to the financial commitment of that $2.5 million, and then also there is the $50 million motion that we referred to, but $20 million over 10 years to be allocated to increase affordable housing and improve the state of good repair. Great news for housing. We really appreciate the support from council on that. The establishment, and just some other activities that have happened, the establishment of Affordable Housing Site Selection Subcommittee, and there they'll be looking at properties that could be offered to city properties that could be offered to social housing providers for the purpose of building new affordable housing units. And then I also put up there as well the motion around underperforming parking lots available for affordable housing. So once again, at all levels of government, a real drive around support for affordable housing. Also around revitalization, wanted to speak to, this is very current for us right now. We were working through it in 2015. We're leading up to the potential sale of 100 of our single and semi-detached units. The business case is just being worked through with Housing Services. We'll be optimistic about ministerial consent for the summer or fall. And then the funds that we received from the sale of these homes would be put in our sold unit reserve fund for the replacement of up to 100 units. And also along in revitalization, asset management strategy. So, I mentioned about the 1,200 properties, and here in this overhead you see it represents those 7,100 units. We've done building condition assessments on the properties. Last year we looked at a report that talked about poor, fair, good performing properties. We now really need to drive our strategy further to say, what do we do with the entire portfolio, with all of the 1,200 properties. And over this past year, I've seen no less than like 5 asset management strategy RFPs go out around regeneration strategies. And certainly from a City Housing Hamilton perspective, we're at that point that we really need to look, as I said, how we drive this strategy forward. And finally, under revitalization, West Harbour, there is a lot of focus, as we know, on this area, and it's good. And I mentioned the 2 properties there, 500 McNabb and Jamesville. We're just in the process of having the updated building condition assessments of those two properties, which will really help to inform our decision, assessing our options. Do we look at an expression of interest? So those steps, as well as what's identified on that overhead, are what will be moving forward in the area of West Harbour. And just starting to wrap up the presentation, I just wanted to move through. So I spoke about those priority areas for what have been for 2015, certainly moving into 2016. And then in terms of financials, just wanted to provide an overview from the annual report of our results, and then also just a bit on utilities, pest control, and energy efficiencies. Here we have this is the 2015 revenues that we received, $73.3 million. Our expenses were 72.4. So, in fact, we finished 2015 with a $900,000 surplus, so that was good. That being said, from an overall operational perspective, we are still in a deficit of $400,000, but it's our intention that we would minimize that with further energy incentive dollars that we're expecting to receive. In the area of capital, our funding was $9.1 million. And our expenditure was $9.6 million, and the $500,000 overage was due to previous year projects carrying forward. I would be remiss at this point, though, if I didn't raise the huge, capital funding shortfall in the area of infrastructure. So we receive, and I've thrown this number out there before, $8.2 million per year for capital. For the past 5 years, based on our building condition assessment assessments, we have deferred capital expenditures in the amount of $90 million. And if you project that out 10 years, we would require $172 million. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my, those are the dollars that we're looking at, kind of from the federal, from the provincial government. But that being said, that is one of our challenges, no question. Utilities, we held our own in 2015, and we did receive the incentives, which helped to offset the climbing prices, and we will need to continue to be diligent around the utility aspect of our operations. Now, I showed maintenance and pest control because I have spoken to these often at the same time, because pest control has had a real impact on our maintenance expenses, and maintenance expenses alone are challenging. And the 2015 number for maintenance expenses is an error. It should be 12.5 million. But at 12.5 million, once again, we kind of kept our maintenance costs relatively constant. I think what's important on this slide is when you look at our pest control expenses, down in 2015 to 1.1, we internalized our pest control operation, and we increased the number of treatments by 35%. We did, and we decreased the cost by almost half, and have had great satisfaction with that program. So we've kept those pest control costs down, spending at maintenance relatively the same, so that percentage of pest control versus maintenance, we've been ratcheting that down. So that means there's more dollars available for the maintenance work. The good news around energy efficiencies, we through 2014 into 2015 received 2.6 million through incentive funding, 1.6 from Horizon, and 1 million from Union Gas. And I want this is taken from the annual report, and kind of as I close the presentation, wanted to highlight this. The work at 30 Sanford around energy efficiency, exterior upgrades with custom solar cladding, good for heating, good for cooling. City Housing Hamilton is, from my perspective, we're ahead of the curve as it relates to work around energy efficiency. And projects such as 30 Sanford, we are positioned very well for those incentive dollars, for those funding programs that are coming down from the federal and provincial government to make these changes to our portfolio. So I think that's very good news currently, and will be very good for us in the future. Just in terms of some final comments before I thank the people who I work so closely with. When we look at quality improvement, we talk about people and process. For me, the Mormon housing, it's about places and people. We have the places that we need to work on. We need to have the infrastructure present. We need to look at what we do in the future. But just important are the people who make these places their residence. What do we do to support them? How do we do that? How do we build those relationships? So I know for myself and the team, this will be key as we move our agenda forward as it relates to affordable housing in Hamilton. Thank you to the 2015 Councillor Scott Duvel, obviously not here in Ottawa, the board members, and for 2016 our present board. And this is a great board to work with. They are their perspective on the work that we do, what we need to do, and supporting us in that. Asking us for the information that helps them do their work, to help to guide us. And the Councillor Collins, as the president, certainly appreciate that guidance. We all do with the team back at City Housing. So to the board, and as well, to this council who have been supporting affordable housing in such a way, we are truly appreciative of the work that you do for us and with us. And all right, that must be my last. But I would be remiss if I didn't thank the team that I work with at City Housing Hamilton, and many of them are here today. We have Teresa Herichuk is here, Donna Kirchnoff, Rochelle D'Souza, Brian Kinnischuk, Matt Bowen, Tammy Forgier, and Dave Pangborn. Thank you all very much. And Adam Sweetland from Housing Services, who is a great source of information and support to us as well. So, Council, that is our 2015 annual report. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Great job. We have a few questions from our councillors, and we'll begin with Councillor Skelly.
Thank you, Tom, for your presentation. Can we go to slide 7, page 7, please? And I'd like you to explain why current rent arrears 17% versus the industry standard of 5%.
Through the chair. So when we started this project, there was, we called different organizations, what was their arrears. And, for us to use this 5% was a wee bit of a risk because arrears is not necessarily kind of calculated or, exactly the same across different housing providers. And, here you're looking at this number was not simply local housing corporations like City Housing. It would also be what was happening in other not-for-profit in the private sector. So, we felt that was probably a pretty safe number to use. And, speaking specifically about that delta, that gap, I think that's, I don't know specifically what that relates to, except to reflect on when we looked at some of our processes that we were achieving, that we were undertaking with arrears. There was quite a different approach across, let's say, use the property managers and their teams. And, we had some who had arrears at, 4%. They had seniors building where it was easy to collect the rent. We had other areas, let's say family townhouses, where they might be as high as 40%. So it can relate to, the type of property. We have 1,700 townhouses in our portfolio. So if we were looking at our percentage versus a senior's apartment, right, where it's easier to collect, yes, they could be at 2%. 2% might be high for them. So it's difficult to compare. So when we really got looking at the process, we started looking internally, what are some of our best practices internally? How do we need to change our process to start to drive that down? But it's difficult to explain that change.
Through the chair, but you're still referencing an industry standard. I mean, the gap is 12%. Why would you provide those numbers unless they came from somewhere? And it's why is it so high in Hamilton? I'm sure they have the same issues in other municipalities across the province. Why is this city so much higher in terms of collecting rent, not being able to collect rent?
Through the chair, I believe that there are variables in terms of what the portfolio and the elements of those portfolios. So I could use, for an example, Peel, right? 35% of their portfolio is market, and they might be very successful at filling that 35% and people paying their rent, and therefore their arrears are down. So, I don't have the specific information around that difference, but because there are a lot of variables relate to that. I have to say that our processes weren't as clear and consistent and as focused as they could be, and the intent of this project was to improve that. So we like 5%. That's a great goal for us. That's something for the staff to work for. That's an outcome that we want to achieve. We get to 10%. We'll celebrate that, and to what extent we continue to move that, we will.
Through the chair, thank you for that response. I still find it very concerning that we have such a discrepancy between what we collect and what is described as, these are your numbers, the industry standard. I'd also like, if you could, what exactly is market rent versus, well, how much cheaper is market rent versus what people would be paying?
Through the chair. So when we generally talk about two types of units, RGI, rent geared to income, and market. So with our market units, the rent is set, and then that market unit is available to anybody who wants to rent it. In the case of an RGI, that's the access to housing wait list. People are assessed, the ability to pay, and then they rent the unit. When we talk about the other item I should say around our market units, we have in most cases, very affordable market units and would, in terms of affordable housing. So I'll use a property such as 41 Reed. A one-bedroom unit on that market unit right now is just around $480 for that unit. It's for a one-bedroom. right? One bedroom, right. So yes, that's market. Anybody's eligible for there, but those units are affordable.
Through the chair, 400, we'll say just under $500 for a one-bedroom versus what would the average unit go for in Hamilton that doesn't fall under housing?
Through the chair, let's say for one bedroom, would I be, the average, would that be around 800, 900? Yes. Okay.
Through the chair, anyone in the city is eligible for this apartment, this one-bedroom apartment then? I would be eligible for this one-bedroom apartment?
Through the chair, for a market unit. Yes.
Chair, what would I pay for that? I would pay $500 for that, just under $500 for that?
If through the chair, if that was the rental price that was set, yes, that we had set, yes.
How do we, through the chair, how do we control abuse of that? If we have a shortage of affordable housing units, how do we ensure that I don't rent that unit?
Through the chair, that's I think a larger kind of systems question. When I reflect on that, when there's, I think, up to 5,000 people on the access to housing wait list, there are a lot of people who are looking for affordable housing. So if we do have, some of our market units that are lower than the average, that is enabling, those people to have a place to live.
Through the chair, so are there any rules in place to prevent someone such as myself with a decent income from applying for market rent, a one-bedroom apartment provided through Hamilton Housing, and get that subsidy? Is there anything in place that would prevent somebody such as myself from having access to that? Because I'm concerned about these numbers that we keep talking about. We have 5,000 people on a waiting list. Would I be on a waiting list tomorrow if I chose to get an apartment through Hamilton, through City Housing?
Through the chair, you would be eligible for a market unit, and the wait list that we talk about is relative to the rent geared to income units.
So no one on the list is looking for market rent housing, correct? No one on this list that we're talking about, the 5,000 people or 5,000 families, are actually looking for market rent?
Through the chair, they could have their name on the rent-geared RGI list. If one of these units came available, which they could afford, they could apply to that.
Through the chair, how much money do we spend, or do all of the market housing units are not? No, all of the market housing. How much money does the city actually put towards that, or is this strictly private?
Through the chair, I may ask either Donna or Adam, who might be aware of that piece as it relates to the market units, or Rochelle.
When you say put toward...
Sorry. How much funding comes from the city towards, or is there any? Is this strictly something that is provided through the private sector?
Yeah, through the chair, we'll ask Rochelle, because you might want to reflect, there's the RGI, there's the benchmarks, that we get the funding from housing services. I'm not so certain about the market units.
For the market portfolio, we have to manage it with the market rents. So no funding would be coming for the market portfolio specifically. The funding comes for the rent geared to income. So in those cases, yes, we receive funding from the service manager.
How many units do we have available in the city of Hamilton? I think we have a list in here somewhere for market rent?
Through the chair for City Housing Hamilton, that number's around 1,500.
1,185.
Okay, those are my questions for now.
Councillor Brenda Johnson.
Yep, thank you, and thanks for your presentation. When I saw it, actually, and I was reading this report ahead of time, I was actually looking for the waiting list numbers, and you just said it, but you didn't have them in here. And I had the privilege of having a secondment with housing in my former life, and my understanding was that the waiting list could also include those that are already housed by City Housing, but they're looking for a unit that's more appropriate for them. So I'm a mom, 4 kids, I get a townhouse, now my kids have moved out, I'm waiting for a senior unit. So do you have a good understanding of the people who are on this waiting list are actually homeless, or what percentage are the ones that are on this list looking to either upgrade because their family's growing, or looking to go into seniors or something smaller because their family is no longer living there?
Through the chair. So the wait list is managed through housing services.
Right.
So that's not an area of operation that City Housing Hamilton becomes involved in, right? We have we have the rent geared to income units, but that wait list and who's eligible and who comes into the units, that wait list is managed by housing services. So
Mr. Sweetland just took a seat by a
thanks,
mic.
Adam.
So through the chair, the number as of May 31st, the total number that we report was 5,900. Approximately 1,100 to 1,200 people are in the situation that Councillor Johnson described, where they're occupying one unit but waiting for a unit that fits their occupancy standard.
And thank you for that. So there's 3,100 left over that are considered either homeless or desperately need to get into a geared to income unit.
No, to the chair, that number would be about 4,700. So 5,900 minus the 11
Yep.
to 1,200.
Got the wrong calculator out. My left side of my brain. Okay, so you've got 4,700 that are desperately looking for geared income. On the units that we have right now that are on market value, and just to follow up with that question from Councillor Skelly, so the units that we have geared to market, are there any plans to actually have them be more appealing for the geared to income at to alleviate some of the pressure on that 4,700? Because if I can pay market value, do I need to come to City Housing, or would I rather go to Effort Trust, or would I rather go to another apartment building?
Yeah, through the chair. One of the areas that we have been looking at is that ratio of our market to RGI units, that the board, has asked for that. And as well, we are looking at, very carefully each one of those properties, and based where it is in the city, let's say for market unit, what might we be able to, increase the rent by, what is the range. So we have done some more specific work in terms of looking at those various units, the mix of our RGI to market, and what is not only optimal for the people who are waiting for housing, but also balances with what we require from an operating perspective. And I know that with when I come together with other local housing corporation providers, that kind of ratio is something that they're attentive to as well. I referenced Peel earlier; they have a higher percentage of market. Currently that's kind of seen as beneficial in terms of the revenues that they can receive from that versus expenses. It's not the same in other portfolios and other cities.
Okay, so you are looking at maybe turning some of these units into, did I hear that right? You're looking at evaluating the whole thing holistically to
Yes.
figure out whether or not we're top heavy with market value. Do we need market value when we've got this long waiting list of people who are considered homeless or in desperate need?
Yes, through the chair, yes.
Okay, so my next question is, and this is probably more curiosity and maybe my perception is off, your units that you're in arrears, are they more typically in the market value side?
Through the chair, is anyone more, of the managers more specific about that? What's that?
It's about even between both the rent geared and the market.
Okay, so we've got a unit on the market,
Yes.
or market value, which is the top price, right, that we're charging people. And we've got 50% of those in arrears and 50% of those, sorry, 50% of the arrears are attributed to the market. So that means your losses are even higher because the potential to rent it out,
Right.
your income is now, it's lost because you're in arrears.
So, through the chair, that scenario could exist, yes.
Okay, so, all right, so that was my, those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And there's certainly a lot of complexity in social housing. I think it's worth noting that social housing, in particular city housing, is often the last resort for people. So we don't have the flexibility that private sector has in terms of screening and handpicking who they want in and who they want out. But through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to Tom. So first a statement, and then I'd like for you to comment on it, because there's been some commentary in the public about our ability to adequately account for our deferred maintenance. And it's been suggested by some in the community that we're not doing a good enough job on the deferred maintenance. And my fear, Mr. Deputy Mayor, being on this committee and being part of the portfolio committee and meeting with Rochelle and staff and just seeing what the real economic reality is, I'd like for you to just comment on this. This would have been to a submission that I had drafted originally to Minister Sousa for pre-budget consultation in 2016, that we are in fact the third largest social housing provider in Ontario, housing 17,000 residents, and accounts for nearly half of the social housing stock in Hamilton. The majority of our buildings are over 40 years old. In 2016, we contributed $8.2 million in capital funding for repairs and maintenance for CHH, which still results in a shortfall of $43 million in a single year. Over the last 5 years, there's been almost $90 million, $89 million in deferred capital expenditures, and the capital forecast for the next 10 years is projected at $172 million. Based on the current funding model as it stands, as flow-throughs from the province to the municipality, this is a download that Councillor Marul and others have been talking about now for probably close to a decade. What gives? Like, when people look at our balance book, they make the assumption, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that the accounting states that the money that we receive from RGIs and market should and ought to sufficiently float our capital expenditures. Could you please, for a moment, for the public record and for members around this table who may not know the dire need of our capital, can you please comment to this almost $200 million 10-year capital forecast deficit?
Through the chair, there's no question that when we look at our current infrastructure, the deficit around maintenance, repairs, and what we need to do in the future, that the current funding that is flowing to us for capital and through our operating for things like maintenance is not sufficient. And particularly around the maintenance, I did put up the one slide. To our best ability as a team, we see that for the maintenance aspect, to keep those units turned over, we need an additional 1.8 to 2 million just for the ongoing maintenance of those units to keep them turning over. And certainly, Councillor Green, the information around the capital, that is the other imperative. That is our reality. When we look at the beginning of the year with $8.2 million in the list of projects that we have to do as a result of our building condition assessments, it's a significant delta. It's a significant gap. So looking at what other local housing corporations have done, what they're doing, let's say around their asset strategy, that's the information that we have to tap into, to start to address this issue as best we can. But the solution, the ultimate solution, what we're seeing from the federal and provincial governments around funding starting to flow for capital, that's a start, but it will not meet our needs.
And further to that, I think that there's often confusion, certainly around the table and in the community, about what market rent looks like. and what affordable housing looks like. Could you comment on, and it's my understanding, private sector, we're hearing lots about private sector affordability. Many developers and landlords out there would claim $1,200 to $1,300 a unit is affordable. And yet we have in the spectrum of affordability some market rents that offer release pressure for people who might not be on the might not be close to the top of that 5,700 people. So can you just comment on the housing mix and what affordability looks like?
Through the chair. So that affordability, helping to clarify and understand that, is important when somebody is looking at their income and doesn't want to spend more than 30%, right, to make housing affordable. That's the number that is most often looked at. We're working, City Housing Hamilton, we're working very closely with housing services, because this is a systems issue. Even when you look at Hamilton, it's, the affordability question, if we just look at City Housing and what we need to do with our market, RGI, mixed portfolio, rent rates, if we look at that in isolation, it's really to the detriment of the system, right? Like what's happening across the city when we look at, if the private sector is saying that this is what they, 1,200, 1,300, there still is the obligation, I feel to house, individuals, provide housing best we can. So that's where we have to, we have to balance that, even along with the West Harbor question, with those properties. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of thought around, what do we need in that area? What do when we look at the population, right, what do we need from a population perspective reflective of housing? What are the percentage of families? What are percentage of 4 or 5 bedroom townhouses that can accommodate that? So the affordability is, once again, complex because there are market units that are affordable. So the challenge for City Housing Hamilton, how do we support the city in terms of meeting its affordable housing needs, and at the same time we sustain our operations.
And I know you'll hear oftentimes in the industry, they'll talk about 10% below market rate is what affordability looks like. The challenge that I have, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and the argument that you'll hear sometimes around the table about the private sector is that they've jacked housing prices up in this community over the last 3 to 5 years, 15, 20%. How much? 27%. So, when we're trying to benchmark our affordability with private sector's affordability, and we know wages stay the same, Ontario Works and ODSP stays the same, we're really pricing people. We've really now created a policy of social exclusion. We're now pricing people out of their own communities by using those benchmarks. And so I certainly see the purpose of us maintaining a good, healthy stock of affordability in that spectrum. And I think that in this regard, we've been more responsible in the appreciation of units, because the private sector practices, they can only appreciate, I think, with inflation, but as soon as somebody's out, they can jack it up to whatever they want, because that's the market solution. And so that's where some of the marketeer responsibility comes into place. But I did think it important for us to have the discussion around the capital expenses, because the general public, I think that the perception, and maybe we've done a poor job with communications, is that the city is just not managing its asset. When the reality is, when the province downloaded, they gave us the, it'd be like getting a mansion from your grandparents in their estate, but not having enough money to pay for the taxes, let alone fix the roof. So it's true that through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to Tom, that we're barely meeting our operating needs and our maintenance needs, and it's also true that this provincial government and its current funding model is leaving City Housing Hamilton, and particularly our social housing component here at the city, far behind as it relates to our deferred capital expenses. Is that not fair to say? To the tune of literally tens of millions of dollars. And so, so that's where I caution the conversation that's in the public forum about the complexity of housing and the housing mix. Mr. Deputy Mayor, when people talk about what market rent is, market rent, let's be very clear, market rent in City Housing Hamilton, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is far below the market rent in the quote-unquote private sector that would, serve to condoize everything and gentrify people into Welland. Is that not fair to say?
Through the chair, when we start to look at that information, yes, there are areas where it would be below, but there are areas of the city where we would be close to that 10% of the current market.
Right. But it's also true that there needs to be a mix.
Absolutely.
And that the social experiment of ghettoizing people and having all social housing, all rent geared to income, we've also found also is not a good social policy. So somewhere in there, we need to find good mixed income developments or housing stock through City Housing Hamilton to have the market rents help offset and pay for some of the capital costs and some of the operating costs of City Housing Hamilton. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I raised those points because we are in dire need of the capital support from upper levels of government. It's also worth noting, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I know, or I don't know actually, maybe this is a better question, how much will our rental subsidy, private sector rental subsidy program, in your opinion, what effects do you think that will have in terms of alleviating our waiting list? Because the city of Hamilton put in $800,000 for community emergency services. You know, the feds are going to be in line to do probably some of the same. Do we think that market solution will also help?
Through the chair, I think it will help. To the extent that it would. I can't be definitive about that. When I put up the slide with we have 100 market units available. If when they are at 10%, what is the average across a particular area or lower, and we get those rented for individuals, that's 100 people off that list, right? So that helps. We have the ability to make some movement to get some traction within City Housing Hamilton, but from as I say before, from a kind of a systems perspective, a larger perspective, that's a bigger challenge. Like, those numbers are hard to hit.
And so I do have to ask this question, Tom. This is the last question I'll ask, but because we're here around council table, and because it's very topical now in the community, what is our rationale and timeline, and this isn't for my purpose, I know we've gone through this before, of the 100 units that we're holding? Because for some people that's very contentious, that we have units that are available, but we have them on hold. If you could, for the public record, just comment on what is our strategy and game plan with those units that are held, why are they being held, and what's the time frame for which they'll be released and or turned over into other affordable housing units?
Through the chair, just for clarification, those are the units 500 McNabb and Jamesville. Yes. So I mentioned in the presentation that in July we'll be receiving the building condition assessments around those specific two properties, right, which will help to inform, kind of the next step. I would say that it's to look at the solution, it could be months to years when we are looking at those two properties and what we are required to do from a City Housing Hamilton perspective. There's not only deciding on the decision on what we do with the buildings, we also have to have a transition in plan for those residents who remain. Right, so there are still roughly, I think it's 40 to 50 residents at 500 McNabb and 74 or 5 families at Jamesville. So we have to have a transition place for those individuals, as well as the things like communication plans. So, it's not imminently in the future. I hate to put a timeline on that publicly to be held to it, but there still is significant work around moving that forward.
Thank you. And President Collins. Second time as a follow-up? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, President. I wanted to, for my information, just clarification on market rent, because I'm getting a conflicting impression of what it means and its significance and importance. Market rent still falls under affordable housing, correct? No?
Through the chair, no.
Okay. Market rent, in your opinion, through the chair, how important is it for a municipality to provide or encourage the private sector to provide market rent?
CEO Tom, you're doing a great job. Really good. Very great. One of the best presentations in the history of presentations. But I'll bet Mr. Sweetland would like to take a crack at this question, as it's been consistent in its delivery today. So, Adam, do you want to give it a try now, since Tom took his turn?
So through the chair to the councillor, there's no one answer to the solution, which is part of the complexity that Councillor Green spoke of. Encouraging the private sector to take part in the affordable housing crisis is a very key component of it. Encouraging our social housing providers, such as CityHousing Hamilton, to maintain a fairly healthy mix of RGI versus market rent is also very important. It impacts the amount of subsidy that the city has to flow through to the provider. It encourages sustainability at the organizational level. Well, and there was another point I wanted to make. I forgot my last point.
Repeat the question. It'll come to him.
My question, through the chair, is the importance of providing and now dictating to the private sector a percentage of affordable housing units. That's legislation that's been passed. They have to provide a certain number of affordable market rent. Is that not correct? So what my point is, how important is market rent to address affordable housing in the city of Hamilton? We can have different designations perhaps, but people still, as Councillor Green pointed out, are finding it a challenge to pay for market rent or to pay rent that is currently demanded in the city. So how important is this provision for market rent in our efforts to meet the needs, the current needs?
Through the chair, are you speaking about the inclusionary zoning? Okay. So that legislation is currently before Parliament or Queen's Park as a legislative change that would allow it, or including that. It is one tool in the toolbox, certainly to encourage private developers to add to the affordable housing stock. I think it's important to look at all of the tools that are available as a whole.
I'm looking for a number. I'm saying is we have a need, and it's 10% of our need could be addressed through market rent, 20%, 30%.
I would refer to the city's 10-year housing and homelessness action plan, which sets out targets that are based on growth projections for the city. So it sets out a target of about 300 units per year to meet the current growth projections, and that's based on the official plan.
Through the chair, my concern is I'm hearing that there are no checks and balances in place right now to prevent someone from abusing the system, and that's my concern. If there is a genuine need for people to have access to affordable units, then I don't think someone, and I keep referencing myself, that I should be entitled to go and take advantage of this and take the place of someone who can't afford it. So, is there any way that we can put in some sort of a provision to ensure that these more affordable units are going to the people who desperately or really do need them?
So through the chair, I would again want to refer to the city's 10-year housing and homelessness action plan. One of the strategies that was endorsed by the City of Council was to ensure that neighborhoods and projects have a healthy mix of incomes. So it's sort of been an accepted sector-wide principle that we would want to encourage different income families to reside in projects and within neighborhoods. That's so we wouldn't actually be wanting to necessarily encourage dissuading people who might need market rent or for their situation would like to live in a neighborhood with other income families.
Thank you. It doesn't really address my concern, but I don't think I'm going to get the answer tonight.
Offline would be. It sounds like you're really interested in, and I'd recommend you pursue it offline. Care about my recommendation at this time. But good questions, Councillor Skelly. Did you want to follow up on any of this, Tom?
Through the chair, I did want to just follow up with Adam's point around this, not specifically the number, but when the reports came in from Deloitte around West Harbour and potential options, there was a lot of talk or discussion around this mix. In order to support rent geared to income, in order to support affordable housing, how do you get private providers, private businesses to participate in that? What does that partnership look like? What's the financial modeling around, how you could have both, like a mixed income, different type of housing on a property, commercial, to make the affordable piece more sustainable and supported as you move forward. So, I think as we look into the future, there are opportunities. So for example, at Regent Park in Toronto, people, I cite that, I think it's Lawrenceville, Lawrence Hill as well. That's work where there has been this involvement, this mix of market and RGI, and it's sustainable from what people say in terms of how you use those two in working together kind of in a synergistic way.
President Collins.
I just wanted,
Go ahead. You're good now.
I just wanted to say thank you to Tom and our team at CityHousing Hamilton, who have done a terrific job over the last number of years. And deficit situation, as Tom not to suggest that we don't have a number of priorities to deal with where money is an issue. However, as Tom has, I think, appropriately pointed out in his presentation, we have a strategic plan in place. Staff, and especially Tom, housing scene. As well as Adam, who has provided. We're blessed to have a terrific group of people helping us. The board has shown support, as has council. So I thank council and the mayor have been very supportive.
Final thoughts? Good?
I'm good.
Appropriate time is now to receive the presentation. Thank you, Councillor Collins. Seconded by Councillor Green. All in favor? Any opposed? Well done. Thank you so much, Tom. Good job, and thank you to our supporters up top, our senior staffers, and to you, Adam. Very much appreciate some of your responses as well. Motion now, sorry, we have item 5.1 before us. This is the CityHousing Hamilton Corporation 2015 audited consolidated financial statements. No discussion. Moved by Councillor Brenda Johnson and seconded by Councillor Maria Pearson. All in favor to receive item 5.1. Any opposed? That's carried. Now our 6.1, a resolution to approve the CityHousing Hamilton Corporation 2015 audited consolidated financial statements. Any discussion? Move it. Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Conley. All in favor? Any opposed? Now we're going to adjourn and have a brief council meeting. So move to adjourn. Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Johnson. All in favor? Carried. Goes without saying, Madam Clerk, there's only one Councillor Johnson here today, so it's always Brenda Johnson for your notes. So remain in council chambers, colleagues. A special council meeting will begin immediately following our shareholder meeting. So I guess it's Madam Clerk, your guidance is welcome. We have to have a special council clerk? Okay. Oh, here she comes now. Janet's on her way. That's great. She's been listening from her office. I don't have a run sheet for, oh yeah, I do. Okay, members of the public are advised that the media and or other individuals may be automated. No, I don't. Do I have a council, oh, you brought it, Janet. Thank you so much. Okay, yep. Good afternoon, everybody. Just to the agenda. Let's approve the agenda as amended. Sorry. Yes, let's just approve the agenda. There's no amendment. Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Collins. All in favor? Any opposed? None. It carries. Members of council, are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Councillor Farr, may I have a motion to approve the City Housing Hamilton Corporation shareholders resolutions? Oh, you're supposed, that's right. Councillor Collins, would you like to be Councillor Farr? Okay. Councillor Collins, a motion to approve. That's moved by Collins, seconded by Councillor Green. All in favor? Any opposed? So that moves the shareholder resolutions. Councillor Farr, again, may I have a motion on the confirming bylaw. Councillor Brenda Johnson and Councillor Connolly the second. All in favor on the confirming bylaw. A motion now to please adjourn. Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Connolly. All in favor? It carries.